look, welcome everyone. Thank you for taking the time to join us today. My name is Matt Hallmark. I'm a member of our value strategy team here at SailPoint, and I'm really excited to speak with everyone today to kind of talk through some of the financial whys for our migration from on-prem solutions to our Identity Security Cloud, our SaaS solution. If you have any questions throughout this webinar, please submit those in the Q&A box at the bottom of your screen, and we'll be answering a few of those questions towards the end of this session. But like Jeremy mentioned, this webinar will also become available to watch on demand on the SailPoint community here in the near future as well. All right, so to jump in, before we kind of really get into the details, a couple comments on what we'll be reviewing today. So we'll cover some of the primary motivations for migrating to SaaS and some of the limitations of on-prem solutions. We'll talk about some of the significant benefits SaaS offers. And then we'll also cover a real-world success story to really illustrate these points. Beyond that, we'll also discuss some insights on what to expect and some strategic tips for a successful migration. Kind of get us started here, why are organizations choosing to migrate from on-premise solutions to SaaS? Now, look, there's a number of common reasons here on the screen, but really alignment with a cloud-first strategy is a theme we're seeing very often. We're seeing these cloud-first strategies being cited as a primary customer driver for choosing to migrate to SaaS because of what's oftentimes considerable cost savings that can be realized just in eliminating hardware and or hosting cost. But at the end of the day, that is certainly not the only consideration. There's also the labor and opportunity cost of performing upgrades and regression testing with on-prem solutions. Whereas our SaaS solution, Identity Security Cloud, enhances operational flexibility because there's no more hardware to manage, and updates and a lot of security administration work is actually handled on the SailPoint side. The major upgrades required to stay on the latest and greatest feature sets for on-prem can be, at the end of the day, very large undertakings. Many of our customers are upgrading their IdentityIQ solution every year or every other year, and this is work that is heavily time-consuming, so in turn, it can become very expensive. And at the end of the day, it's not uncommon for us to actually see companies staff augmenting this work due to, either existing business priorities or limited resources, which can further add additional cost, each 1 to 2 years. So to share an example on that front, where identity teams are thinly staffed for on-prem solutions, we've actually seen situations where performing upgrades has to be prioritized over things like, say, internal audit requirements or more bespoke priorities and tasks, just in order to maintain ongoing performance. However, shifting to SaaS really enables these resources to not only maintain the current program with more limited subject matter expertise and no risk of downtime, but also focus on expansion of modernization initiatives across the company. So at the end of the day, there's certainly an opportunity cost piece to consider with on-prem solutions as well. In addition, the use of AI and ML in governance, access requesting, and activity data delivers incremental business value to our customers by really helping them make quicker, data-driven decisions while adapting to a rapidly growing application ecosystem and what's often varying identity types that need to be governed as organizations grow and evolve. And look, at the end of the day, CIOs, they're recognizing and resonating with a lot of these pain points and drivers. As example, last year in our data, we actually saw a 14% higher probability of obtaining business approval for a migration to SaaS when the CIO was involved in the program evaluation and decision process. This is because these stakeholders often sit much further from the identity program and might not have that intimate knowledge around really some of the intricacies that it takes to run legacy on-prem solutions. Now, jumping forward for a moment here, when we start to think about if or when proposing a migration to Identity Security Cloud within your business, I think there's a couple of things to consider here. For these kinds of projects, you're almost certainly going to have to build a business case and really compare what you have versus where you're going. And there's nuances here that may go beyond what many customers are thinking about. But at the end of the day, we as SailPoint can help guide you there. So to kind of get started, start to think about operational or financial limitations of on-prem solutions. Like we talked about on that last slide, transitioning to SaaS often results in lower overall cost through operational efficiencies and capital expenditure savings. This is because on-prem solutions are highly customizable, whereas SaaS is much more configuration-based. With this, we often hear a lot of commentary from our customers, really around the pain of performing those manual upgrades and the resultant regression testing that's required for customized on-prem. And at the end of the day, that's pain that also scales linearly with the level of customization. Combine this with maintaining and upgrading the hardware infrastructure, whether that's on-prem or virtualized or a combination. And there's significant work and CapEx that's needed to keep the lights on. In addition, when cloud hosting an on-prem solution, we'll oftentimes be seeing real meaningful year-over-year price increases from cloud service providers. So that's just another variable that can kind of further amplify the cost structure. These are just a couple considerations to kind of keep in mind for the infrastructure and the upgrade side of the house as you evaluate your potential transition. Now, when we start to think about resourcing with on-premise solutions, you're typically looking at a pretty specific set of expertise that's necessary to manage and maintain them once they become fully customized. And we're often hearing difficulty in finding and backfilling these highly technical resources. Versus when we kind of shift to start to think about shifting these resources to running a more scalable SaaS architecture, it really enables a more flexible model by freeing up talented SailPoint resources to prioritize, further expansion of the identity program across the business, instead of just kind of focusing on keeping those lights on. Now, because of all these intricacies of on-prem solutions, there's often considerable opportunity to repurpose resources and cost to more strategic tasks within the business after making a shift to a SaaS solution. Ultimately, optimizing the operations and reducing the total cost of ownership of the identity governance program, while still improving that efficiency and security posture that's so highly valued. Now let's talk about some of the key value drivers for making a migration to Identity Security Cloud. Now, we talked about some of the cost buckets specific to on-prem that go away with SaaS. And oftentimes what that results in is a significantly lower total cost of ownership over the long term compared to on-prem. But our AI capabilities that are native to our SaaS solution are also something our customers get really excited about. Now, our AI and ML-driven features streamline role management and access controls, enabling acceleration of business processes while still expanding and strengthening the governance across the organization, just as a couple of examples. You can actually look at application activity data to glean insights too. This presents opportunity to see how and where your employees are using their applications, and in turn, really empowering and enabling the identity teams to revoke unnecessary access, run more diligent certification campaigns, and enforce least privilege. And ultimately, sometimes eliminate considerable cost from those unused SaaS applications and unnecessary subscriptions. So certainly an opportunity to potentially eliminate some very hard costs for the business with that transition to SaaS. But SaaS also innovates at a much faster pace. SailPoint's Identity Security Cloud receives about 60 plus updates a week to specific microservices in the solution. So instead of potential downtime associated with software version upgrades and resulting regression testing, our SaaS customers, they're always on the latest and greatest versions and feature sets. Whereas, like we talked about on that last slide with on-prem or single tenant cloud hosted solutions, there's manual work and in turn costs necessary to perform upgrades. A component we certainly go deep in evaluating and peeling the layers back on as part of our migration assessment program. And nowadays, at the end of the day, SaaS is the cutting edge for the latest innovations across software providers. An example here is SailPoint's one-of-a-kind application onboarding capabilities. They're powered by AI and ML that we're rolling out here in the next few months. Now, look, onboarding additional applications is a pain we're often hearing from a lot of our customers, and something I'm sure a lot of you are familiar with, kind of like the previous customer mentioned as well. Now, look, these upcoming capabilities, they're going to help our customers onboard applications much, much faster. To give you an idea, we are actually seeing 40% plus reductions in application onboarding times when using these capabilities compared to traditional on-prem app onboarding. Now, this is driven by streamlining processes such as, connector type identification, schema validation, recommending connector parameters for integration, just to name a few examples and activities. So at the end of the day, look, the innovation train is rolling full steam ahead here at SailPoint, and this is very evident in our R&D investments. Now let's take a moment here to look at a cost comparison for a large organization here in the services industry. What you'll see here on the screen is a slide detailing the summary of a total cost of ownership comparison between IdentityIQ and SaaS Identity Security Cloud. And look, I think the punchline here is that while SaaS is oftentimes more expensive in year one due to those migration expenses, like I've been mentioning, it's often cheaper over the long term due to lower ongoing maintenance and operational costs. Now, in this example, what you'll see here is that this customer was forecasting to begin seeing net cost savings right after year two. This is all based on a cost analysis they co-developed alongside our migration assessment and value strategy teams as part of the migration assessment process. Now, in particular, this customer really highlights some of the complexities of managing an IdentityIQ environment or any on-prem environment, because they had a total of over $2.2 million just in infrastructure and compute spend over 5 years as a combination of on-prem and cloud-hosted infrastructure. In their case, certainly an opportunity to really remove some hard costs for the business and shift the opportunity towards SaaS to run a more scalable, more flexible program across the organization. And then what you'll see here on the right side is a bar chart representation of this total cost of ownership analysis. Now, look, like I said, year one is typically more expensive on SaaS, but what you'll see from year two onward is another big value our migrated customers are seeing. This is that consistency and predictability of the cost model. Now, while it's certainly not to say it's representative of everyone, many of our customers are actually able to shift recognition of their SailPoint cost from CapEx to OpEx due to this predictability. And on the contrary, what you'll see in those dark blue bars as they annualize on-prem cost are the big ebbs and flows of this total cost of on-prem. Oftentimes, a big driver in this cost model inconsistency is things like software version upgrades, regression testing, and growing technical debt. Many of our customers are upgrading every year or every other year, And like I mentioned before, it's not uncommon to be bringing in consultants to help with this work because they can become, such large projects, particularly as, customization increases. And this can run into sometimes hundreds of thousands of dollars, especially when, like I mentioned, a lot of customization has been done to that on-premise solution. And this complexity and pain at the end of the day, it goes away with Identity Security Cloud as a true multi-tenant SaaS solution. Now, that isn't the case when thinking about some cloud-hosted single-tenant solutions with multiple versions, multiple code bases that are out there in the market, and sometimes might be mistaken for a multi-tenant SaaS solution. Jumping forward here, though, what you'll see here on the screen now, these are some key takeaways from a case study SailPoint actually did with our customer Nelnet. So Nelnet recently chose to migrate from IdentityIQ to Identity Security Cloud, our SaaS solution. Now, since migrating to Identity Security Cloud earlier this year, Nelnet has managed over 20,000 identities with less resources. And that's really allowed them to focus on more strategic projects that bring value to the business rather than just maintaining systems and infrastructure. Now, this transition really underscores the strategic and operational benefits of moving to a SaaS model. But starting to think about the expansion of the program, Nelnet is also a great example of how SaaS drives further expansion of the identity program by using AI and ML. So they were able to actually analyze, define, and implement over 500 business and IT roles with the help of our AI access modeling capabilities. When this work is done manually, it's often work we see organizations either just throwing internal bodies at or hiring third parties or consultants to come in and help design and build their RBAC program. Now, at the end of the day, of course, this can become extremely costly, not only to design and implement, but also to maintain that program, right? Keeping those roles relevant and accurate as needs and responsibilities adjust and evolve alongside the organization. And our AI can really help alleviate a significant portion of that analysis and discovery necessary to create a great role program, and then automate that maintenance work of that program. So thinking about the maintenance of the roles program for a moment here, when compared to maintaining an RBAC program manually, really requiring a lot of headcount, a lot of expertise, we're really seeing very considerable reductions in the amount of labor that's necessary when using our AI capabilities to perform these health checks in an automated fashion and proactively making recommendations to what access should be added or should be removed from roles. This is a value that really rapidly scales upward as well as organizations grow larger and become increasingly more complex. So to wrap it up, Nelnet was also able to implement over 85 additional certification campaigns. This was really enabled by driving significantly more scalability in the certifications, by empowering reviewers and managers to make those database decisions so they can streamline the review of the low-risk entitlements while still ensuring a high degree of diligence in their reviews through the identification of high-risk outlier entitlements. To kind of dumb it down, maybe, think about these AI governance capabilities like a proverbial crutch for reviewers to kind of lean on during those certification campaigns, really empowering them to ensure that they remain as efficient as possible while still maintaining that utmost degree of diligence. Now let's shift for a moment here, talk about a couple drivers as well as some ancillary benefits that we often are hearing our customers kind of wish they knew before they started their assessment and evaluation of a transition to our SaaS solution. So SaaS is cheaper in the long term. Like we've talked about throughout this session, while often more expensive in year one, SaaS is often cheaper than on-prem or cloud-hosted solutions over the long term. Now, this is due to shifting costs from multiple variable buckets like infrastructure and infrastructure upgrades and maintenance, the software version upgrades and resulting testing, the backend development, etc., really all towards a more predominantly software cost model. Started to think about operational and regulatory agility. SailPoint's SaaS solution really unlocks both organizational agility and innovation by helping our customers stay on the latest and greatest versions, innovations, and feature sets. So because our SaaS solution pushes dozens of updates per week without downtime, the manual upgrades and testing that are painful for all on-premise solutions really just go away. This gives our customers much more flexibility to roll out new features, onboard new applications, and really leverage security operations AI capabilities to adapt to what can sometimes be an evolving regulatory requirements. At the end of the day, it allows real scalability of the identity program so those resources can go be more strategic and more pointed with their time and their tasks. And look, lastly, while transitioning from on-prem to SaaS is often focused on total cost of ownership, use cases, and pace of innovation, there are some more ancillary financial implications of shifting to a SaaS solution. So like we talked about, SaaS provides flexibility due to the predictability of that solution's cost model, but also, while it's certainly not tax advice, and you will need to consult with your finance team and your tax experts, there are 17 US states that currently offer SaaS favorable state tax rates. So that can be kind of another maybe gravy on top, if you will, type of benefit to your organization as well. Well, I just jumped one too far there. But look, what I'd like to wrap up with is a bit of a summary overview around that why SaaS is cheaper in the long run, just to kind of expand upon that theme a bit. Now, look, there are a couple cost categories here on the screen that are important to consider, but at the end of the day, our migration assessment process can really help your team peel back the layers on each of these categories to really empower you and your team with a detailed business case around why a SaaS migration might make sense for your company, and really some of the intricacies of that cost model between both what you're doing today and what the future might look like.